Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are live. Thank you for joining us, everybody. This is the Wrestling with Reality podcast. My name is Kris Kloss, and I'm going to be joined by some awesome individuals today. First off, I want to introduce our guest. He's done it all across the landscape of professional wrestling. We're going to get into all that. I mean, he's been here, he's been there. I knew him way back in the day when I was just starting out. We're going to get into all that. Of course, my co-host, Eric Melikian, is here. But we are going, as well as the man that makes it all happen, according to who? According to Woods. But
I guess it's
today,
me.
That's right. But today, it's going to be all about our guest, the one and only. Welcome, my friend, a legend in this business, Navajo Warrior, right here on the Wrestling with Reality podcast. Welcome, Navajo.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this awesome podcast with you guys.
I mean, we're gonna go down a huge hole, a huge rabbit hole, because there's so much to go down and sift through as far as your career goes. Like I said, we're going to talk about WWE. We're going to talk about right here in SoCal back in the day, just getting started. But man, this is going to be an awesome interview. And like I said, you and I have crossed paths not only recently, but way back in the day. So we'll get into all that. And my goodness, and Eric Melikian, I know you're excited as well.
Absolutely. I've worked with this guy before, so it's always an honor and a privilege to be around him.
I feel like, Eric, I think you should get us started off.
Absolutely. Steve, we normally ask all our guests as the first question, how'd you get started in the wrestling business and what was your training like breaking in?
Okay, well, it was a cold, dark night, cold white moon. No, it was, I started training in 1990. So what happened was I grew up as a fan, always wanted to become a professional wrestler. And really back then, it was hard to figure out how to get into it because there was no internet. It's not like they had wrestling schools out that advertised that you could go to. But luckily, I was working at a movie theater at the time, and I saw a wrestler walk in that I recognized from TV, and I decided to take a chance, walk up, introduce myself to him, and went from there. So I introduced myself to him. His name is Steve Gatorwolf, and he told me, "Oh, hey, we're doing a show in Coolidge, Arizona. Why don't you come on out and watch?" You know, so I was like, "All right." So fast forward to that night of the show. I get there early to see if they need help with anything, and of course they do. So I start helping with the ring, and then he asked if I wanted to ring announce because the ring announcer didn't show up. So I was like, "Sure, why not?" You know. And that's when I got introduced to some of the guys from Southern California, Billy Anderson and Lou Spicoli and Primetime Peterson and David Hanna and his brother John. I met them for the first time at that show, and then after that show, I asked Steve about training, and that's how we started going into the training. First day of training, we met up at a YMCA, got on the wrestling mats, and he just proceeded to kick my ass for an hour straight, and I just had to keep fighting back and trying to wrestle. You know, we were wrestling, and then when we were done, it was like, "All right, see you tomorrow." I was like, "All right, yeah, I'll be back tomorrow." You know, and then we did it again, and then the process was basically show up, get your ass kicked, come back again the next day. Then once he knew, all right, he's serious about this, we'll start teaching you something. And then it went from there. Then I started learning how to lock up, how to grab a hold, what the hold, you know, different things like that. And then on top of that, he would start teaching me the wrestling etiquette, how to approach another wrestler, how to introduce myself, how to act in a locker room, things like that. So it was a slow process. We didn't get into a ring until a few months into my training, and then I actually got to step into a ring and learn how to, you know, run ropes, take bumps, and in a ring rather than on a wrestling mat. So it was a tough tough process. It was a lot different back then than it is now with, having wrestling schools that you can go to. You have like your choice. You have them from pretty much every state has someone that's training guys. So big difference. But I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Now, how long was your training before you had your first match?
Let's see. I would say it was about 6 months before I had my first match, and I will totally admit that I was not ready for my first match. I thought I was, and then I had my first match and realized that I still don't know anything. So, funny story about that first match. The referee was talking to me during the match, so I would get kicked and I'd be down, and the guy would stomp my chest, and the referee would tell me, "Sell your chest." Not knowing what the word "sell" meant, I'm laying on my back and he stomps my chest. "Referee, sell your chest." So I start to like puff up my chest, like, is that what I'm supposed to do? Like, I'm selling my chest, right? Look at my chest. And then I start to get up, and then they do something to my arm. "Sell your arm," and I start flexing my arm. And the referee finally was like, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, I don't know. So yeah, I was not ready for that first match, but it needed to happen. I needed to get in that ring for that first time just so I could get those nerves out of the way as far as like my first match and being in front of people for the first time.
So breaking out in the West Coast region back in the early 90s, wrestling's not like it was then compared to how it is now. How was it getting booked and getting your name out in the early years?
It was in my early years, it was really hard. Luckily, my trainer ran reservation tours. So he would run 3 times a year. He'd run in the spring, he'd run in the summer, and then he'd run in the fall. And it would be a tour of the Navajo reservation. So we would be in multiple cities. So we'd be like a week-long tour, and we'd be wrestling every night. And then Bill Anderson would bring his crew, and those were the guys that I get to wrestle. So I get to wrestle with Louis Spicoli, and that's who I learned a lot from, was getting in the ring with Lou. And then and with Bill himself. Bill Anderson would wrestle as Starman, his character that he did in Japan. And then we had Lou Fabiano from the East Coast come in. Sometimes he would bring in Jimmy Snuka or Honky Tonk Man. And that's how the ball started rolling on getting bookings in other places. I would always ask guys like Snuka, guys like Bill Anderson, guys like Honky Tonk Man to watch my stuff, give me feedback so I could get better, and I would learn so much from these guys. And then Honky Tonk Man would actually take my 8x10s and put in the work for me with different promoters that he would wrestle for. And then calls started coming in. And then Bill gave me a list of the different promoters that he knew, and I would send my 8x10s and my VHS tapes and stuff. So that's how that got the ball rolling with my bookings. And luckily, it worked out well. Having experienced guys vouch for you, and then also having a character, a gimmick that is something that people would want to see. It's a lot easier for somebody with a gimmick to get work than somebody who's just a wrestler, especially in the early 90s.
Now, about how long after you started getting the ball rolling, you started getting bookings, getting your name out? When did you start doing enhancement talent matches for the WWF?
The first enhancement job I did for the WWF was in '93. So 3 years in from my training, and Bill Anderson's the one that opened the door for me there, and it was in Phoenix, Arizona was my first time, and so that's what got the ball rolling. And then after that, Chief Strongbow and Tony Gurria took my information, and then they would just start reaching out to me for more enhancement work, whether it be in Texas, New Mexico, Southern California, Northern California, in the Bay Area, anywhere on the West Coast, they would start using me. And then down into Texas, and it kept me busy, which was really good. And then, but yeah, that opened that door with that first time with Bill Anderson.
Do you remember what month that was when you started up Enhancement in '93?
Yeah, it was April. It was right after WrestleMania.
Oh, okay, right. Oh,
So
yeah.
right after WrestleMania, first match was with the Head Shrinkers, and then later that night with Razor Ramon. Then the next day we shot Superstars in Tucson, and that's where I was Yokozuna for the first time. So it was all these guys that right off of their WrestleMania that they did in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Tell us memories working with Scott Hall and Yokozuna.
It was kind of scary with Scott Hall. I followed his career. I mean, I saw him in the AWA, WCW, so I knew what I was getting into with him, even with the Razor Ramon character, knowing kind of his moveset, what he does. So that was cool for me because I was like, man, this is Razor Ramon, Scott Hall. This is top guy, and it was a lot of. I was just excited about that one. Really excited about that one. With Yoko, I was nervous. I was worried. He already had that reputation of hurting guys if they didn't fall in line, or if he didn't like them, or if they messed up in any way. So I was afraid to mess up. I didn't want to screw up. And getting with Yoko, I introduced myself, told him, look, I'm with you tonight. What would you like in the match? And he just smiled and he said, we'll lock up. I'll take over from there. And that was it. That was all I got. So now I'm really nervous because, okay, well, now what if I screw up? But we go into the match, and I wasn't familiar with his moveset as far as his setup to go into his finish, and it was always the same. It was the shoot into the corner, the big jumping backsplash, and then the opponent kind of stumbles forward, the double thrust chop falls right into place for the bonsai drop. I did not know this. I took that hard buckle. He jumps in, splashes. I'm thinking in my mind, I'm going to make him look really good. I'm going to fall forward, just take a big face plant. So I take the face plant, and all I hear is Mr. Fuji on the outside saying, "That's okay, that's okay." And I'm like, "Oh shit, I'm in trouble, right?" Yoko reaches down, picks me up, says, "You're good," and throws me flat onto my back, right where I need to be, and then hits the move. Luckily, he took care of me. He didn't, break any ribs, didn't throw his feet out from under himself. He hit it perfect. And we get to the back, and I apologize, and he's like, "Oh no, look, you did great. I didn't tell you anything. I didn't say anything except we're gonna lock up." So he was really cool about that. And then later on down the road, I got to work with him a couple more times. And then when he left WWE, I got to team with him on a couple of shows. So it was a cool experience. But I was really, really nervous and worried, but afterward I felt better.
I know I'm jumping ahead a couple years here. What was it like working with Vader?
Oh, Vader, another one that I was nervous about because he had that reputation of hurting guys over in WCW. So I was like, all right, well, I was his first enhancement match in WWE. He was already looking like a monster. He, destroyed a couple of guys in promos, and then he took out Gorilla Monsoon, and now I'm his first, enhancement match on Superstars. And so when I got with him, I just introduced myself, said, "I'm with you tonight. What would you like to do?" And he was complaining about his ear hurting from the pay-per-view. And this was after another WrestleMania, the one in Anaheim. Complaining about his ear, thought he busted his eardrum. So I was like, okay, So he's like, "I don't know if I'll be able to get you up for the power bomb," which he was going to use for the finish. So he kept wanting to pick me up in the back just to make sure I would get light enough for me. He kept picking me up. And then he kept setting me back down. He's like, I need to do it again. He grabs me again and picks me. I'm going up for him. I mean, I was only maybe 220 pounds at the time, so it was nothing for him. But he was constantly just wanting to do that over and over again because he wanted to make sure he'd get it in the match, and of course he did. But when we started the match, before they used to do the lighting where they would have the different colored lighting for the different wrestlers, and before the introduction, he already attacked me and started pounding on me, worked me to the corner, started giving me those shots in the corner, those big punches, and man, those hurt. Those rocked me. I mean, the first one right to the side of the head, my head was already ringing. So I'm like, oh man, it's going to be a long night, even though it's a short, maybe 3-minute match. It felt like it was going to be a long one. But yeah, that's what it was like working with him. It was you knew you were in there with somebody. He was a heavy-handed guy.
Memories working in the mid-90s for people that broke me in the business, Alex Knight and Ed Aarons over at the AIWA.
Yeah. Those great guys. I love the Southern California guys were always so good to work with and work for. Like Alex Knight, I always liked his ring. It was always such a nice bump, except it had that tarp canvas, the slit canvas. So if guys were baby oil, or if they were, if it got sweaty as the night went on, then you were worried about slipping, on that thing. But I loved that ring. It had the ropes, but he was always great. I remember we did a deal in, I think it's called Dolan Springs, Nevada. It's like in the middle of nowhere in the desert, when you're driving between Arizona and Nevada, like if you're heading to Vegas, and it's or Chloride or somewhere. I can't remember the name of the city, but we were at a American Legion or a VFW, and I think maybe there were 10 people in the crowd, but I'll never forget that. It was one of those where we still had a great time. We had fun. We gave them a show, but anytime I'm driving to Las Vegas and we drive by that turnoff, I'm like, oh, hey, there's that. The hills have eyes that way. So, but yeah, I love working for those guys. It was always fun.
You kind of the bonsai drop. That was something that I always try to figure out. How did he do that safely? Because everybody was like, "Oh, Yoke," unless he was pissed at you. I mean, he was light as a feather, what have you.
Yeah.
Except for that one kind of botchamania clip where he just sits on Homeboy's face, right? Yeah, right. So you kind of just I'm bewildered on the fact that, my goodness, he was actually safe with people.
Oh yeah, the leg drop, that big jumping leg drop he would do, you wouldn't feel a thing. The most I felt with that one time was when the material on his tights almost kind of like brush. That was it, like just a brushing of that material on my leg, on my face from his leg, and that was it. Nothing. I mean, and then of course you sell it big for him and make it look like he just pancaked you, but he was so good. I mean, I've never wrestled with anyone that big, that moved that well, and it was that light with you in the ring.
And obviously, you just mentioned, back to back, two of the most legendary big men in the business, in Yoko and Vader, right? Both world champions in their own right. Does it kind of, all these years later, and both of them have since passed, unfortunately, only a few amount of people are able to work with one, if not both of them, and you have that distinction. So does it resonate to you all these years later?
Oh, definitely. It's funny when people talk about the best big men in wrestling, and Vader's always in there, Yoko's always in there. Some of the others, like they say Undertaker, guys like that getting to be in the ring with one of them, or even two of them, it's like an honor. It's so cool. Even though at the time it wasn't like I was selected specifically for those guys. It was just one of those where it was just the luck of luck of the draw that night. And then I remember when I got chosen to wrestle Vader, I was mad at Cincinnati Red, because we were traveling together. And when you get to the building, they'll have a sheet on the wall, and it has the matches, the names right across from each other. And Red got Jerry the King Lawler. I got Vader. So I told Red, I hate you, Red. But I'll never forget that. That was one of those where we were running to a lot of the shows together. But yeah, I just remember giving him so much crap about that. I was saying, it's like, come on, man. Well, I'll trade you. I want Jerry Lawler. But it worked out great for us both.
Go for it, Eric.
Yeah. Speaking of, working, working on a show with Jerry Lawler, during this time, what was left of the existing territories were still around. Did you ever have a chance, or did you ever talk to any of the offices about going to Memphis or any of the other territories, maybe like Puerto Rico or any of the other places in the Northeast that were still around?
Yes. I spoke with Carlos to work in Puerto Rico, and so worked in Puerto Rico for just one small tour. Russell, I talked with Jerry about trying to come in USWA, but the money, it was just one of those things where, like, traveling from Arizona to Memphis, Tennessee, and then really not making any money, it was going to cost me a lot. And I remember Red and little Dave, we call him little Dave, Dave Floridia, they hopped on a Greyhound and they went to Memphis and did some USWA tapings. And but that was one that I was going to go on with them, but then I just couldn't justify the cost. Having a family and those responsibilities at home to take care of as well. But yeah, those two, USWA, and then I don't know if they considered it a territory because it was new in the 90s and it was out of Las Vegas. It was the NWC, and to me that felt more of a territory type because it was a lot of the guys from the territories and from the WWF that wrestled there at the NWC, and that one was one that helped me out a lot as well because I got to wrestle with a lot of the guys that were top name guys and learn from them, and they would always teach me, like, Wahoo used to do this, or Strongbow used to do this, try this, and all the different things for the character that I was portraying that other people did in the past. And then I would take things, try them. If they worked, I'd keep them. If they didn't work, then okay, I'd ditch it to the side. But at least I'd give it a shot and try to make the character more well-rounded, and then do those traditional moves that a lot of the other guys used to do, and then add in my own stuff. But yeah, so as far as like territories, Puerto Rico was really about it. But I would consider the NWC close, as close to a territory as you could.
We've heard a lot of stories about what the Puerto Rico territory was like. Would you like to elaborate on your time over there? I know you said you only did, one shot over there. How was your experiences over there?
It's beautiful there. Love the beaches, the weather, everything was really beautiful and nice. We were at a baseball field, and the one thing that stuck out of my mind about that was that the fans really, if they don't like a heel, they really don't like a heel. Like, they were being in a baseball field, the way the lighting is, it's pitch black out, and then you have the lights, the baseball lights, and so you don't see something coming at you until it's almost got to you. And there was a battery thrown at my opponent, and I just saw it out of the corner of my eye once it hit those lights. Like the lights were shining enough to where you could see it. Then it was like, oh man, that could have hit me. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it was pretty straightforward. Knowing people that take care of you makes it easier too. Having guys there that know you, that will not let someone take advantage of you or let a promoter take advantage of you. And back then, I don't know if it's so much like that anymore anywhere, but you had to kind of be careful about everything. Keep an eye on your money, keep an eye on your boots, keep an eye on your gear, keep an eye on everything. And so you would make sure that somebody's watching your stuff while you're out in the ring. You're watching theirs while they're out in the ring. And, it was a different time. But like I said, all experiences that kind of made me into what I became, as far as like the longevity and the way I would train guys. And it was all things that I picked up along the way coming up.
Yeah, and also, right, this is, you get over there, what year was it that you were over in Puerto Rico?
94, I believe. 94, 95, I think. And then
So within a decade of Brody's death, right? Was there any type of kind of hesitance from American guys going over after that?
not at that time. Once the first people went over, that because everyone was saying they'll never go back there. But once the first guys went over, then everyone else kind of started to feel like it was not going to be as bad. And, it was like more of an isolated incident or, but I mean, in the back of my mind, I'm always worried about everything, especially at that young stage of my career. I'm like worried about every little thing that could happen. But yeah, as far as like the rest of the guys, no, it would seem like it was like business as usual, going back into work.
Were you there the time Eddie Gilbert was there around that time frame?
No, he wasn't there when I did mine, but he might have been around that same time period.
Okay. You mentioned him earlier. Going to ask you about the greatest intercontinental champion of all time, the Honky Tonk Man. Any thoughts and memories over the years with him?
Yeah, Honky Tonk Man, whether he wants to admit it or not, he helped me out so much. We did a tour of Europe in '99, and that was my first overseas big tour, where we were in England, we were in Germany, we did Spain, we did Italy. So it was like constant travel, wrestling every night, and I was wrestling the Honky Tonk Man every night. So every night it would be a lesson learned as far as like what to do and what not to do. I used to fire up when making my comeback, and I would grab my opponent by the top of the head, right by the hair, and then I would do like a war dance around, hit him with big tomahawk chops. And first night, and I also hit knife edge chops. It was all part of what I do. And first night, he pulls me aside after the match. Don't chop me. Don't chop me in the chest. This and this. Tell me why. But okay. I said, tomahawk chop's okay. He's like, yes. Don't grab my hair. Don't grab me by my hair. This is my gimmick. Don't grab me by my hair. So I'm like, okay. So then next night, changed it up. Still do the same spot, but change it up now. Now instead of grabbing it, I'm just placing my hand on top of his head, making it look like I'm grabbing it, but I'm just, but it was always something new. And then we would be on the bus together, the tour bus together, and he would want me sitting right by him. So he would tell me stories, or he would give me advice, and it was always something new, So I would learn so much from him every night. And then, like I said before, he would help me get bookings with other promoters. He would always, and so whenever we would be on the show at the same city, the same town for the same promoter, I would end up wrestling the Honky Tonk Man. He's like, oh, I'm working with a kid. Okay, and then we'd have our matches. And then, but yeah, that man taught me a lot. And, I can never thank him enough. I'll see him every now and then. We did an event when we brought IZW back. I would say it was 2 years ago, like a reunion show. And we were helping raise money for Jerry Gray, who's, fighting cancer. And so I called up Honky. I said, hey, would you mind popping in? He's like, no, I'll be there for Jerry. I'll be there. And he came and went out, did a song and dance, and met the fans and signed autographs, took pictures, all that stuff. And then, I'm like, all right, well, I wanted to take care of him. And he's like, no, it's for Jerry, and then he went on his way. And then, and it was right after he went into the Hall of Fame. So we had, greatest intercontinental champion of all time, and Hall of Famer, and then he came out and did his thing, and like I said, he just was like, okay, see ya. All right, kid, I'm out. And then he left. But yeah, always so good to me.
Memories of working with Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Oh, the Hammer, yeah. So the first time I wrestled with Hammer was for the NWC. We were in Sacramento, California, and I was moving up on the card, and so I was starting to work with those guys, the legends and the guys that established guys. And Greg he's the real deal. I, as a kid, watched him and Tito Santana have one of the, I think in my favorite feud of all time was Greg the Hammer Valentine and Tito Santana. And then getting to get in there and wrestle with Greg the Hammer Valentine, like all I could think of is my grandfather's looking down, with a big smile on his face because he hated Greg the Hammer Valentine because he always cheered for Tito Santana. And Greg, man, wherever he wanted you, that's where he put you. I mean, he can move anyone. You could try to fight it. He put you where he wants you. Then he's got those big. His hands are like cinder blocks. They're just so thick and heavy. And so when he hit you with those chops, my toes would curl, and then he'd be like, "All right, fight back." So I'd start firing back on him, and then, but man, he was another one that we started to wrestle on the loop. We'd wrestle for different promoters in different places. So it'd be like, if Hammer was on the show, I'd wrestle with the Hammer. If it was Honky Tonk Man, I'd wrestle with Honky Tonk Man. If it was a tag team, if it was the Bushwhackers, there was the Ballard Brothers. So it was like they had their guys that they liked to wrestle with, and I was lucky that Hammer was like, yeah, I'll work with him. And then we just, except another guy that we learned a lot from. This was the guy that he broke Wahoo McDaniel's leg. So it was like he knew, and then he also he put Chief Jay Strongbow out of wrestling. So it's like he knew how to work with the gimmick, and he would teach me how to be the gimmick so that he could work with it, and so it was a lot of fun. A lot of big learning experience.
So one question I have, right? Obviously, John Dakota, Navajo Warrior, your heritage is a big part of who you are and your wrestling persona. How cool is it, right? And I mean, especially your infancy in the business, you got to do a lot of reservation tours, right? So how cool is it to, being up at, brought up in Arizona, there's a lot of Native people there in the contingent, and you're representing them. Like, any cool stories about that and the reservation tours, or people just being honored that you're portraying your heritage so proudly?
That was, to me, it was never lost on me. I always thought that was the coolest thing because we would go to the boarding schools, or we'd go to do different things, gatherings, powwows, and we would do all these different things just to meet the people, and they were so excited because they're like, man, it's like when they see a Native wrestler, they're like, oh man, it's one of us. It's somebody that looks like me that's in that ring, and so to me it was like, man, it's a responsibility because I'm like, I'm representing. And some, it's funny because some people will be like, well, why are you wearing a headdress? The Navajo don't wear the headdress. I'm like, well, I'm representing the Native Americans. It's not just one tribe. It's like all of us, so it was just one of those things where you get negative and positive, but it was mostly positive. But it was always like, especially in the community, because they would always want to see us. They'd be like, oh, they're here, the wrestlers are coming. And, Navajo Kid's going to be here. All right, let's go. And it was cool. And then when I came back as Navajo Warrior, they're like, oh, it's Navajo Warrior. It was always really neat. And then years later, when I switched heel and I started wearing the war paint and started wearing the wolf skins, then I started learning about, like, okay, don't wear the wolf skins on the reservation. Don't wear on the Navajo reservation because it's taboo. It's bad. But the kids thought it was cool, but the elders were like, no, don't. And I wouldn't anymore. I would take that away I'd still wear the face paint, which was fine, but I wouldn't wear the skins, and I would, so it was like a learning process, because it's like I don't want to insult, I want to represent. So it was one of those things where, it was cool. It was really cool because, just being taken in and taken care of. They would always want to bring us gifts or food, or just to take care of us while we're out on the road. Because they're like, oh well, we know that you got to go to this other, 400 miles this way, after that, and so here's some food to take with you guys on the road, or it was always so cool.
Now, Kris, I'm going to interject you into this. Do you want to take the reins of this and discuss how you guys met?
Yeah. So, man, this is, first off, all this is so great, Navajo, and learning a lot, and also memories coming back, about your career. So this is a perfect time to get into this, because about the late 90s, where we're at right now, pretty much. I want to say it was 98. And then I want to say the first time you and I crossed war paths was right there at, speaking of Yokozuna, speaking of Honky Tonk Man, was at our time in SCCW together, Southern California Championship Wrestling. We talk about Kevin Kleinrock, all that. Darren, Dynamite D, Patrick Hernandez, of course. But that was, I want to say it was at UCLA.
Yes.
The event was called Slam Fest, and it was, Honky and Yoko were respectively opposite teams in the tag team main event. So that was, I remember at the time being a part of that as a ring announcer. You were on that show, but I remember that was again, with indie wrestling, kind of the infancy days, like let's say the Territory or the Outlaws kind of died out and indies were kind of coming up somewhat around that time. What were your memories of that? And also just the vibe. Again, it was a new thing I felt for the fans at that time, that climate. It wasn't commonplace to go to a pro wrestling event unless it was a WWF at the time in, let's say, Los Angeles, right? We didn't have that as much of a history of the Territory, the Outlaws, as the East Coast or the South did. So, for fans to come to shows like that on the West Coast, like, what? I'm going to see pro wrestling, WWF style, but in a, on a smaller level in a venue. It was you didn't have indie shows every other weekend or every weekend. It wasn't commonplace at the time. So that to me, that was a kind of an exciting time in the business, especially in the indie level, with the attention I think it got from the fans. But can you talk a little bit about that time in your career in SCCW and that event and that whole gamut?
All right. So yeah, during that time, leading up to that event, I started wrestling for IWF, Impact Wrestling Federation, in Simi Valley. And so that's where I got to meet a lot of the guys, meet Klein Rock. So I was friends with Cincinnati Red. So all of our time we traveled together. And then Gary Key, and they were the two that ran the promotion. So I was like, okay, I came up and I brought one of my students with me, and he would wrestle on the cards. And then I would start to meet the Southern California wrestlers more outside of Bill Anderson's group, Bill and Jesse's EWF group. These were the guys, Crazy One and Tech Nine, and like the guys that were in that area that were starting to build that indie Southern California independent scene. And so to be in on that, it was almost like the ground floor, doing those shows in Simi Valley and starting to meet those guys. Hardcore Kid used to come to the shows as a fan and watch. And then who else was there? Mr. Outrageous, Al Burke, who the longtime wrestler before that, he was wrestling on the cards. And then the Ballard brothers is where I met them. And Patrick Hernandez, and as the referee there. So just meeting all those guys and starting to work with those guys, it was a really cool vibe because it was something new, something that was like you said, like starting that independent scene, in Southern California, and then moving on up to the show at UCLA. That was awesome because getting invited to be part of that, I thought was great because I'm like, all right, this is so cool. With Klein Rock and with you announcing and all the different guys that were there, and a lot of them were ones that I wrestled with at in Simi. So it was a lot of fun, and then to watch it grow from there, and it's funny because I watch now, and like AEW reminds me of that style of wrestling that is what was starting in Southern California. To me, a lot of the tag team wrestling now is like stuff that the Ballard brothers were doing back then, and it started to, wrestling started to evolve into that style. And same with the Young Bucks and those guys that came out of Southern California. So, to me, it was cool because in Arizona we didn't have an independent wrestling scene. We didn't have a wrestling scene really. We had the reservation tours, and that was it. So, you didn't have a group that ran in Phoenix or a group that ran in Tempe or a group that ran, anywhere else. It was always just us going up on the reservation. So, to be on something in Southern California, it was really cool because that's where I learned a lot as well, because it's like now I'm working this other style, and I would also call it the Southern California style of wrestling, which was different from the style that we would do on the reservation. Some of the guys would do like high flying moves and stuff on these reservation shows, and the fans they'd be enjoying it, but they'd be quiet. They'd just be sitting on their hands, just watching. So my style was always get them involved. Let's make them come up out of their seats. So it was a lot more psychology than moves. And then coming into the Southern California wrestling, it was a lot of moves. It was a lot of spots, a lot of high spots, to get the crowd up, rather than a look or a gesture or anything like that. But it was really cool.
Yeah. Anything really quick? Anything before you go to the next question, Eric? Can you talk a little bit more about Dynamite D, Gary Key, and Pat Hernandez?
Yeah. So all three of them were awesome. So Patrick, I felt horrible because in See Me they had me turn heel, so they had me join with Red, right? And every match, I would always throw the referee out of the ring, and every time I would throw Patrick out of the ring, he would hurt himself. I was like, oh, I feel horrible. He would either like hit something on his way out, or hurt, or land on his ankle funny, or hit his elbow, or and I'd feel so bad because I'm like, Patrick, I'm trying to be as gentle with you as possible. I don't want to hurt you, but I love Patrick because he was so good. Being in the middle of a match and just hearing him, giving you your time. Not only would he do the things that referees are supposed to do, the giving you time and letting you know what's coming up and all of that, he would also give you encouragement. He would also, oh man, you guys are doing great. Oh, this is good. It's like, then you count 1, 2. Oh, that was beautiful. And so that I'll never forget that about Patrick. He was always so good at letting you know where you needed to be and when you needed to be there, but also letting you know how you're doing,
right.
And giving you that encouragement of how you're doing in your match. And then Dynamite D was, it's like you meet people that when you meet them, it's like you feel like you've known them. He's one of those guys that was like very, very friendly, very likable, and very smart when it came to wrestling. And so it was like when I met him, it was like, man, I've known you. Because it was like those little pieces of those veterans that I was learning from were all in him. He was one of those kind of guys that was like, man, he had that wisdom beyond his years in his wrestling wisdom, which was cool. and then I think that's how we got along so well, because it was like, all right, yeah, he's a guy that he gets it. He's somebody that gets it. But yeah, who else? Did we ask? Gary. Gary, yeah. So Gary, I met through Bill Anderson, because he was wrestling with Bill, and then he would be doing the enhancement talent stuff as well on a lot of the shows, and so that's how we met. And then we would see each other a lot, and I actually just saw him, I would say, within the last year out here in Arizona. I think he's living out here in Arizona now.
Right.
And we both attended one of Billy Blade's micro wrestling shows, and so it was cool to get to see Gary and catch up with him, and of course it's at a midget wrestling event. So yeah, but yeah, those were some awesome guys.
Now, through your connection at SCCW, did you ever talk to Kevin Kleinrock or Rob Black about joining XPW?
No, that never came up. Not from my end or their end. It wasn't something that I was looking to be part of, and it wasn't. I don't think they saw me as somebody that they wanted to bring in. It was never discussed. So, I mean, of course, I heard about it, and it was like, oh, cool, more wrestling, but. Yeah, no, it wasn't anything that was talked about.
Now, we're going back to the late 90s, early 2000s here. You started your own promotion, I believe, and you broke in some fairly big names around this time, too, including WWE's Luther Reigns, Mike Knox, and ring announcer Justin Roberts. Can you tell us about your memories breaking them in, and are you surprised to what they've done in the business since then?
So yeah, it was 99 when I got back from that European tour. I really thought, I was like, I want to start teaching or start training guys in Arizona, because I know that there are wrestlers that would like to learn. There are people that would like to learn how to get into the wrestling business, and so I was like, I want to be able to give them what I didn't get from my trainer, because I learned most of my stuff from the guys that I was wrestling against. He taught me the basics and some etiquette, and then it was like, all right, here you go. I wanted to be able to teach them more of the ins and outs and the things that I learned along the way from those veterans that were teaching me. So I opened up a wrestling school, and it was a small, and we bought the ring from Gary and Red, and so then I ended up. They were the Impact Wrestling Federation, and I liked what they called where they ran their shows. They called it the Impact Zone. So I called mine Impact Zone Wrestling, because I like to keep that impact in there, and I like the Impact Zone. So I was like, that's how I started ICW. And so, yeah, some of my first students, Luther Reigns, I met him. He was a student at ASU, wanted to get into wrestling, and we kind of found each other. And then I started training him and his buddy David, who wrestled for, it was I think it was called Urban Pro Wrestling. It was one that started up in, I think it was California, and it didn't last long. But he wrestled there for a bit, and then he got out of wrestling. And then, so Horseshoe was my first student, Luther Reigns, and then Mike Knox started to come around. He broke in with Gary in Port Hueneme and found out that the ring was sold. So he was like, oh, okay, well, then he'd make the trip to Arizona. He was living in El Centro, California at the time. So he would drive from El Centro, California to Arizona to train, and then turn around and drive back home, and then come back, and then train and go home. I mean, that guy, that's dedication. Somebody that he would, go that distance to work. And so those were like my first guys, and they were doing really well. Like Luther he had the look as well. He was a big guy. I mean, legitimately 265, 270 pounds of muscle, and 6'3", maybe 6'4", big. I mean, he had a look impressive. So it was one of those where it's like, man, if he can learn how to wrestle, learn how to work, he's gonna do things. And he did. He picked up on it very well. He did awesome. And Knox too, another big guy. Not as built at the time. Now he's massive. And he's doing great with the NWA, so it's pretty cool. But Mike, like I said, another guy that he just picked up on so fast. And he was doing, standing moonsaults and top rope leg drops and the moves that the big guys don't do, which was cool, at the time. And then he brought that to WWE when he went there, and even though they didn't want him to, they wanted to keep him more like a punch and kick guy. But then once he got to wrestle with Rey Mysterio, he started throwing in that flying, crossbody, just smashing guys with it. Now you see a lot of the big guys starting to do that. They all started taking that. They took that from Mike. Mike's the first one to do that. Then Justin came out to Arizona from Chicago and to go to school. He was going to school at U of A, and he got my number from, I think it was either Adam Pierce or from someone else in the Chicago area. So he would call and leave messages, and then finally we met each other. And when we finally met, it was for Dale Gagne was running a show in Bullhead City, Arizona. And so Justin was announcing the show. So now we finally met and we got in touch with each other. Then anytime I had a show or anytime anyone was running a show that needed wrestlers, a ring, or anything else, I would supply a ring. I would supply wrestlers for the undercard. I would supply a ring announcer, which would be Justin. I would get him as much work as I could because he was one of those guys that he was all about wrestling, being that ring announcer, and trying to be that Howard Finkel, that voice to give those introductions that would get guys that pop. Ring announcing is a lot harder than you would think. You think it's like, oh, I go in the ring and I announce guys, but no, it's a lot harder because you gotta engage the people, get them interested in what's happening, as far as get interested in the guys that are coming to the ring that they've probably never seen before. This is the first time seeing someone, so that ring announcer is going to make them sound good. Make the bad guy sound like a bad guy when he announces his name. Make the good guy sound like the good guy that you're supposed to cheer for when he announces his name. So that's how those guys started coming around, and then. I remember the one thing I remember most about Justin is that he was constantly recording his introductions, sending them to WWF, always updating stuff, always reaching out, wanting to try to get his foot in that door. And once he got his foot in that door, he just pushed it wide open. And, now he's, the AEW's lead ring announcer and had his great run with WWE, and now he's there, and it's one of those things where I hear the announcers now. Back then, everyone wanted to sound like Howard Finkel. Everyone had that same kind of cadence and the same way that he announced. Now, when I hear ring announcers, I hear Justin. That growl in his voice and the way he announces them. Mike Rome in WWE. Sometimes some of his announcements sound like it's Justin. I'm like, oh wow, oh wait, that's not Justin. So those were some of my first students, and they went on to do great things. And then I had Hollywood Yates, who was a rodeo a bullfighter in rodeo, wanted to become a professional wrestler, so I started training him. And then he was one of those guys that was doing really well at it. And then at the same time, American Gladiators started to come back. They were doing their show that they were doing on NBC. And so he was in that position of, do I go with WWE and possibly go to the developmental, or do I sign with this new American Gladiators that's going to be coming on? And he made the choice to go with Gladiators, and so then he was the Wolf on Gladiators and did well with that for those 2 seasons that it ran. And he's one of those guys that's like jack of all trades. He's a singer, he's a bullfighter, he's a wrestler, he's an American Gladiator. He's still out there performing rodeos, and he's also doing concerts, you know, in different places. So, you know, another good guy. And then Gabriel Gallo, who when I was training him, he'd become my tag team partner, and we started traveling the world together. He got the Navajo Warrior treatment as far as like learning. He learned on the road like the way I did. You know, we were just going everywhere together and learning. And now he's training guys, and so it's crazy when I see the wrestling talent that's in Arizona now. They all come from someone that came from me. You know, it's someone that I trained them, or someone that I trained someone that trained them, and it's cool. I mean, to me, that's something that will live on. You know, something that I'm the kind of the genesis of it here in Arizona. You know, and it's amazing.
Memories of working IFBB Pro, Aaron Baker.
And WBF.
Oh yeah, Aaron, lover boy, Aaron Baker. Yeah. Wow. Looked like $1 million. That guy was, woo, muscles on muscles. Nicest. He was so polite, so nice. And that's how that was my first match with UPW, Rick Bassman's UPW. And so I came in and Rick's like, all right, you have experience. Let's put you with Aaron, somebody that can help lead him in his match, you know. And so I did. I made him look strong, you know, and look the part. And the part that he looks like, I made him wrestle that way. And he was someone that I thought if he would have just kept with it a little longer, he would have done a lot more, you know, and but then it's like all of a sudden he's gone. Where did he go? You know, but wrestling him was fun. I had to keep telling him, lay it in. I can't feel it. Lay it in, because he was so light and he was just so nice, you know, like almost too nice, but great guy. And then he was somebody. Excuse me. When I would run shows, he was somebody that I would reach out to and say, hey, I've got something coming up on this date. Are you available? I'd love to have you come out. You know, and he was one of those guys that would look great on a card, you know, and he would deliver. You know, his matches were basic but good. But yeah, that's another guy that, man, hear that name again, it puts a smile on my face.
Working for Rick Bassman and UPW during the height of that run, where they were essentially a WWF developmental territory. What were your memories working for Rick and working those UPW shows? And did you ever have talks with WWE during this time about a contract off?
So working with Rick was great. Like I said, my first match was with Aaron Baker, and it was at the Roxy in California, Hollywood. And I remember that because it's the Roxy, you know, like somebody like, you know, my age, our age group is like, there's some places that are iconic, the Roxy, the Whiskey, the Viper Room, you know, that you always hear about, and the Rainbow. You know. So getting to wrestle there, I thought was awesome. And then actually being in there, it's so dumb. But, you know, it was still cool. But Rick was, he liked what he liked. And he wasn't afraid to tell you what he liked, you know, and he was all about bodies and the work, and the work came second, you know. And it's like, if you look the part, we can do something with you, you know, they'll teach you how to wrestle, that kind of stuff. So I knew my job was to get in there, work with these guys, and kind of help bring them along and make them better wrestlers. Because they're getting to wrestle with somebody that they're not training with every day, and that they're not, you know, seeing all the time, and it's not the same person. So I would get in there and I would help pull these, you know, stuff out of these guys to make them better. And then, like I said, Rick put a lot of trust in me to help with these guys. And so he's also the one that told me when I changed over to being a heel, you know, he's like, do you want to be like all the other native wrestlers before you, or do you want to be the first Navajo Warrior? And I was like, dang, okay. And like I said, that's something that stuck with me. And that's when the look changed. Everything changed about Navajo Warrior. It went from being the baby face that wrestled and looked a lot like Strongbow, Wahoo, those guys, to being looking like no one else. No one else was doing the war paint that I still wear to this day, and wearing the wolf skins and the breechcloths, and I changed the look completely and changed the style of wrestling completely. And it's something that stuck and that I've kept since then. And I'll never forget him saying that. You want to be like all the other ones, or you're going to be the first one of you. And I chose to be the first one of me, and but it was great. And yeah, doing stuff with WWE, we would talk with Bruce Pritchard would come in, Jim Ross, when he was talent relations, would come in. So there were always talks, and it was always that's when I was picking up a lot more dark matches. I would go and wrestle. I'd be with them for like 3 weeks in a row, and then wrestle dark match as a babyface, and then the next taping it's work as a heel, and then work with the face paint, without the face paint, with the headdress, with the wolf skin. They were always just trying different ways of what they could do with me to see. Is something going to fit? Will this fit? Will this fit? Do we like this? Do we like this? And so I was always, I think being part of UPW and having those eyes on us was a big help in me getting all of that attention, to where Sergeant Slaughter was always like, okay, no, let's put Navajo in there, let's do this. So it was great. I mean, working with UPW was huge, and also that's where I met John Cena, and then I took John Cena and said, let's teach you how to work on these reservation tours, so you're not wrestling in front of the same crowds, the same people in Southern California, the same. And so I would take him on the road with me, and then he'd travel with me. We wrestle each other, and then Mike Knox was on the card as well. Then we do tag team matches, and it was like every night we'd be wrestling twice. We'd be doing singles matches, tag team matches, and then tear the ring down, on to the next town. Same thing. Singles match, come back, tag team match. And so that's where John picked up a lot of different ways to work in front of a crowd, and different styles of wrestling, and different approaches to it, which I thought was really cool. And it's funny because you see him now, and he'll throw a little, like, oh yeah, me and Navajo Warrior, we used to go and we'd run this state, that kind of thing. He never forgets. He never forgets. As big a star as he's become, in wrestling and outside of wrestling, he never forgets where, who helped him along the way and where he came from. He would tell my daughter, like my daughter Stevie's, oh man, I had so much fun with your dad, and it's just cool, to have somebody like that still appreciates what he learned, which was cool.
And also, when you look at the who's who's of the wrestling landscape today, right, and UPW's kind of tie in, and we basically got lightning in a bottle, right? And so you had Edge and Christian coming in, you had Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, Dakota, like Hardcore Kid, Aaron Aguilera. There's so many guys that went on to do, one Sylvester Turkai, right? Like there's a lot of guys, the Predator. So do you have any memorable matches or instances where you're just like, or even when you found out like any one of those guys that made it and you're like, of course they did?
There was more of them that I was like, of course they did, like in a good way. And then there were some who were like, what? So, and then those the ones that were like, what, didn't make it past the developmental level, but you can see that if you know what you're looking for. It's like, I don't know if they're going to be coachable enough to move on to that next group. But Samoa Joe, even before he started with UPW, Cincinnati Red broke Joe in. And when I ran my very first show, I ran it in El Centro, California, and it was at the fair. So we were on the fairgrounds, outdoors, and a couple of my guys couldn't make it to the show. Well, Red was on the show. Red came and he brought Joe with him. He's like, "Hey, I've got this kid." I'm like, "No, let's put him in. Let's go. I want to see what he can do." And so right off the bat, Joe was good. He was talented, and then he just got better and better. And at UPW, that's where he really started getting better, especially when UPW started doing the crossover with 01 Japan, because then he would start learning that Japanese style the right way, not the way that most people think it is. I watch wrestling now and they say strong style, and it's not what we were doing and what they were doing in Japan. It's completely different, but Joe, man, he excelled. He excelled. He was one of those guys that I was just like, when he finally got that WWE deal, I was so happy, because I'm like, this is a guy that's he should have been there years before he was, but yeah, another great one that came out of there. Sylvester, just freak athlete, monstrous big guy. I loved wrestling when we were in Japan, because I knew that stuff was going to go down in the crowd. When the Predator would come out there and he's swinging the chain, and it was like seeing Brody come back. It was crazy. Tom Howard, a lot of these guys. It was seeing them when we would go over to Japan and seeing how they would do there was a big. Almost like a big amount of respect. I give them a big amount of respect because of how they handled themselves and how they wrestled over there, how they, did well. And so, but yeah, I had so many good guys. Like you said, Edge and Christian came through and wrestled with the Ballard Brothers. And then it was the Hardys with the Ballard Brothers, and Edge and Christian came in, and Chavo, Rey Mysterio, you could, the Undertaker was supposed to come to one event, he couldn't make it, and then who ends up taking his place? Triple H. It was like, wow, you never knew what was going to happen at UPW shows. It was the closest thing an independent could be to a WWE show, because it was a feeder. It was a developmental for them. So it was awesome, great experience.
Memories of the Miz.
Okay, the Miz. He's one of those guys that was working so hard, but he was undersized for what Rick liked to push. So he wasn't really he was more of the undercard. They used to do what they called light shows, where it was like not a main show, it was just a smaller show at a gym. And he was doing a lot of those. And I just remember, this is somebody, and this is when Justin and I were running IZW. And Justin's like, I got this idea. It's like, what? We were running 10P, which is by ASU. He's like, and this is after the Real World, and this is after Tough Enough came out. It's like, why don't we do Real World versus Tough Enough? The MTV shows, we put Kenny King from Tough Enough and The Miz from the Real World and wrestle each other. And so that sounds great. And so we would bring Miz out to Arizona and do those matches. We would do the Real World versus Tough Enough. And I think we were the first ones to do anything like that. I don't know if anyone else ever did, but he was another one of those guys that was always trying to get better. He was always working so hard. And then it carried over to him in WWE. He's one of those. He's the go-to guy. He has been for years. As far as like, what do you need? You need somebody for media. There's him. You need somebody to do radio. You need somebody to do TV. You need somebody to promote your product. You need somebody to be anywhere at any time. He was the guy that you could rely on. And so he's straight company guy. And that's something that he had in him from the beginning. to where he was just going to do whatever he needed to do to elevate the product, and get better at it himself.
Got another one for you. How about working the Monday Night Raw where Scott Steiner and Triple H had that infamous pose down?
So it's funny that I just, for the first time, saw my dark match from that night back. Somehow it's out on somebody got a hold of the tapes, and because you don't fight dark matches anywhere. But yeah, so now I got to watch that. So that night, KG Sakota and myself worked as a tag team against Mike Knox and Hollywood in one of the dark matches. And so during the day, they told us, okay, this is, you guys are going to wrestle in dark. And then when they started putting together the pose down thing that they were going to do, they're like, oh, we need guys to be judges, like cricket judges, but we need guys that look like meatheads, but so it's like, all right, well, so they used the four of us that were in the match, and then a couple other guys. They used Gallo, who was there, Derek Nykerk, who was there, and then the four of us. So there were six of us, and but that was another one that was it was a lot of fun. Because we're not wrestlers. We're not supposed to be wrestlers. So when we're getting up into the ring, it's how you get in the ring. Like, you don't get in like you know how to get in the ring. You kind of fumble a little getting in the ring. Or you see Ric Flair in front of you, and what would a fan do if he saw Ric Flair in front of him? We're geeking out for Ric Flair. It's like, oh, it's Ric Flair. Look, it's Ric Flair. And then, when the time comes and in the pose down, when they're doing the push-ups, then boom, it was just a big a big ruse, to just attack Steiner so that Triple H, gets the upper hand when they're going to lead to their match. But one thing I do remember, another thing I remember about that is we go through rehearsals, and Steiner's going to hit this person, hit that person, and then I made sure he was swinging those arms, and you've seen the size of his arms. He was just swinging those things. So I remember when it came time to do it live, I got in as close to him as I could, so that he couldn't, catch me with that elbow. So it was just catching me with that knee of his arm, so that I wouldn't end up, getting my eye split or anything. I just came in really close to him and just, took my bump and fell out. But the thing that they didn't do during rehearsals that they did during the live shot was they didn't have there was big monitors, speakers around the ring. So you had to figure out a way to bump out without hitting those things. And so it's like, wait, what are these? So just one of those things. Another thing that I add to it, it's like, oh, well, be careful for those. But yeah, it was cool. It was one of those things too that pops up every now and then where it's like, oh, this many years ago on this date, this happened. But yeah, that's one of those cool events that we got to do.
So I guess now, right? Because you had dalliances in the past with the WWE in a myriad of different ways, right? But you're one of the only people, I probably think the only person that is all elite and a part of the WWE universe, in the sense that you do modcap for the THQ Nordic as well as the 2K series. So it's kind of a wild way that all your years of experience, and it's kind of your body but behind the camera that gets you a part of these illustrious rosters.
Well, okay. So technically, I'm not all elite. Motion capture, a lot of the stuff was on file that we've done, so I didn't do anything specifically for it. But it's kind of neat to see your name pop up when people buy the game, and then it's like, oh, they send you a screenshot with your, and it's like, oh, all right, cool, but you know, it's cool, and I haven't done motion capture in a long time. So what I do now with the games is I am basically licensing manager. So I handle the main license for WWE for the 2K games. So when we need voiceover recordings, scans, head scans, reference photoshops, anything, marketing, I have my hands on all of that, dealing with talent. So I'm like a talent wrangler, talent relation, talent, you know, so I'm the one that the talent sees. It's like, okay, this is what's needed. Go to Steve. Boom, we'll take care of it. And then that's how we do it for the game, you know. So it's always something different. One week it's like, oh, hey, we got to get some voiceover recordings done. Let's do that. Or we got to get some scans done. Let's do that. Oh, I need to book a couple guys for motion capture to do it. Then we get them over there and they do the motion capture. So yeah, it's a little different than what you thought as far as the mocap. Don't do that anymore, but I handle a lot of booking for it.
Still pretty cool.
Oh yeah,
there's worse jobs to have.
Right. No, I love what I do. I'm still in the wrestling world, the wrestling bubble. You know, I'm still in it. Whether when I stop being in the ring, I'll still be a part of it. You know, like, but just not having to take the bumps anymore. They've become a lot less. You know, like now it's maybe 4 shows a year. And then it's probably going to dwindle down to maybe 3, and then maybe 2, and then, you know, I might be done pretty soon. It's taken its toll, you know, but I love it though. It's always going to be part of it.
Which, I mean, that's the mark of a true great worker, right? To the maximum effect in taking less bumps, right? Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
Now tell us, I was looking at your Facebook account and I noticed you're doing a lot of strongman competitions now. Tell us a little bit about that and how you entered that universe.
Okay. So the pandemic hits, right? All the gyms are closing. I'm training with my buddy Derek, who was also security with AEW. So Derek and I are training together in the gyms, and now the gyms are closing. So we switch over to another one. Then it closes. And then now they're all closed. He's like, well, hey, Steve, I have a buddy. He's got his own gym at home. He said we can go train at his place. So we start going there. And when I step in, the guy's name is Marshall Zinn. When I step into his garage gym, I see equipment that I've never seen before. He's got, you know, Atlas stones. He's got log press. He's got strongman equipment. And, of course, regular gym equipment as well, and all the weights. And I'm starting to ask, well, what is that? What is that? You know, and they're telling me what everything is. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And so we're training there. We're working out there. And then one day, Marshall pops in and says, hey, come on Saturday. We're pulling a truck. It's like, what? He's like, we're pulling a truck. Come on Saturday. I'm like, okay. So I go home and tell him, hey, Saturday, we're pulling a truck. He's like, you're doing what? So we go and do a truck pull. We harness up, got a chain behind us, hooked up to a truck, and we're pulling a truck. And then I was like, that's cool. And he's like, every Saturday we do strongman training. You're more than welcome to come. So I start doing that. And then he tells me about a competition that he's going to be doing. So he's like, I'm doing a competition this next weekend. Come check it out. Go to the competition. And then I see a bunch of strongmen, like Jerry Pritchett, one of the strongest men in the world, is a judge at this thing. And he's massive. I see this man is massive. I'm like, who is that? Oh, that's Jerry Pritchett. I'm like, oh, shoot, it's Jerry Pritchett. So watch the competition. I watch Marshall. He cleans house, right? He takes first place. Wonderful, right? But I watched the events. I'm like, this is so cool. And I've watched it on TV. But it's different being there in front of it, watching people do right there. Right? It's not television. And same with like wrestling. Like when you're in a live event, it's so different than watching it on TV. So on the way home, I was driving home, and my wife looked over at me. She says, "Do you ever think about?" And before she could finish, I said, "Nope." Mm-mm. Why not? Did you see what they were doing? I said, yeah. Like, that's why not. I don't want to do that. Well, that lasted a week, and then Marshall told me about a competition that he was going to help run that was coming up, and so he was like, "I want you to sign up." I'm like, okay. And then that was my first one. 2020, 2021, my first competition. I do well at it, and now I'm hooked. Now I'm like, okay, well, what can I do next? What's the next one? And that year, I qualified for nationals, internationals. Didn't do that great because it was my first time competing against the best strongmen in the nation. And but I'm like, I want to qualify and go again, the next year. So 2022, go to nationals, win it. Become America's strongest master. And that's my division is heavyweight, masters 50 plus. So it's ages 50 and above. And it's crazy to think how many strongmen there are that are 50 and older, that are guys that were world's strongest man. Mark Felix was in my division. Nick Best, names of guys that I was like, wow, these are the guys that I was watching on TV, and now I'm competing with them. And so it's cool. Now I'm America's strongest master. I placed 10th in the world's championships. That was the one with Mark Felix and Nick Best, and but to even make it the top 10 in the elite group like that, it's an honor. It's something to where I work really hard at it, and I really want to be the best I can be at it. I'm just one of those guys that when I do something, I don't do it partway. I've got to go all in or not do it at all. So that's where I'm at now. I've gotten to compete at the Arnold. Going to be competing at the Arnold again this year. So it's pretty awesome. It's kind of like taking over, my life as far as I'm up at 4 a.m. training. That's how I start my day. 4 a.m. I'm in the gym, training for my next event, and then start my day after that. And it's normal dad mode. Take little one to school, pick up from school. Still got to do my work in there in between. And working on my diet, my recovery, everything else that I've got to do to compete. But yeah, that's how it all started with strongman. It was like the pandemic hit, and then it was like kind of opened doors for me as far as learning about strongman, and then went into that.
That's incredible. Congratulations. Would you say this is your passion alongside pro wrestling nowadays?
Definitely. It definitely is. A lot of guys, when they, hit their mid 40s, it's kind of like that's when they want to kind of step back and relax more. And not me. I'm like, well, let's go. 52, and I'm like, let's go. Let's. And a lot of people have asked, it's like, well, do you get hurt? How do your joints feel? How do your hips feel? And honestly, I feel better now than I did before I started training strongman. It's just kind of strengthened everything as far as like the joints, the hips, the core, all of that has gained so much strength that now I don't have that pain in my mid back that I used to have. Now my knees, don't ache when it gets cold out anymore. It's crazy. And it's all from just that constant training and use, and not abusing it, just using it and training it and building it, making it stronger.
I think your body is just after taking bumps for how long, decades, right? It's finally, right? We get to get built up and just stay built rather than try to get tear down.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Eric.
We're getting Well, we're over the hour mark and we're getting close to wrap this up. Unless Kris or Adam have anything else they'd like to add, we usually close off the show with one question. Basically, everything you've taken from your years in the wrestling business, how do you apply that to your life in general?
Okay. One thing that I think one of the main things that being in the wrestling business taught me was to be, and I know it's going to sound kind of weird because of what wrestling is, but it's to be real. You know, be real, be you, be as genuine as you possibly can be, as genuine as you are at all times. Because when you're faking it, it means nothing. It means nothing coming from you, and so nothing that happens to you means anything. So if you can go through life just being genuine and real with people, with family, with friends, with anyone that you come in contact with, it's going to take you a long way in life, and people are going to remember that. They're always going to remember how you treated them, you know, and rather than how, you know, like things that happened to me when I was younger, the way someone said something to me, or something that someone said to me, or the way someone treated me, you never forget. And so I always wanted to be the light in that, you know, being as real and genuine and as good a person as possible. And that I actually learned from wrestling, which is funny because the whole idea of what we do is we're putting on a show, but you can't put on a show in life, you know?
I couldn't agree with you more. I know exactly what you're talking about, Navajo. And for those that don't understand or that do know what you're talking about, you know, no explanations needed. It's one of those things where we're going out there, we're doing a work, but if you're going to continue doing that work in the locker room in real life with the boys, like, you're going to get called out with it pretty quickly, you know? So, and you see how important that is to, once you're working, you see how important that is to, okay, now I have to turn it off. If unless I'm not being totally respectful, I have to turn it off, you know?
Yeah.
And so you, and you get to know the, how to just, you act a certain way out in the front of the curtain, but then behind the curtain, you're conscious and aware of how now I'm supposed to act this way, respectful, real, because it's the opposite of what I was just doing. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, wrestling can give you that great life lesson for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Excellent. And Steve, I mean, obviously you've done so much. You're continuing to do so much. For those who want to follow all of the things that you're doing on the socials, on the interwebs, and what have you, where can they find you?
Where I'm most active is Instagram. It's Navajo Warrior #2, letter K. Navajo Warrior 2K. It just seems to be the easiest one for me. I've tried Twitter. I've got a Twitter account, which is Wrestling Tribe, but I'm hardly on it because I don't know. It just seems like one's enough, especially if it crosses over into like Facebook. You know, you just post your thing on Instagram and then it goes to Facebook. But to me, Facebook's more like friends and family. But on the Instagram, it's more what's going on, what's happening, what do I have coming up, where am I competing next, where's my next wrestling event, that kind of stuff will all get put up on there. Like I'll put up a show flyer or a poster or you know, photos from the events that we did, things like that. So it's Instagram, it's Navajo Warrior 2K, and that's the best place to find out what I'm doing.
Heck yeah.
Well, this
And
is good.
Jens,
This has been really great, Navajo. Thank you again. And if there's anything else you guys want to add, I guess we'll call it a night, call it a show, call it an awesome episode.
Awesome.
Now, Navajo, if people want to book you maybe for a potential wrestling booking seminar or anything to do in the strongman world, can they just contact you on social media? They want to inquire within?
Yes, reach me through the messenger on the Instagram is probably the easiest way. And then I am available for wrestling seminars, wrestling bookings, strongman coaching seminars, things like that. I didn't even mention during this. I also work with kids. My daughter's a boxer, and so at her training gym, Real Does Boxing, I'm strength and conditioning coach for some kids there. And I have a 12-year-old that I'm training to compete in strongman, and he's done one event so far, and he nailed it. He did great. So we're trying to get him ready for the next year, America's Strongest Teen. So he'll be 13, and we'll be trying to push him in there to see what he does with like the whole national level. But yeah, so anything, you can reach me on my social media, and like I said, wrestling, strongman, strength and conditioning, or just to say hey.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor to have you on today.
Thank you guys so much.
You.
Well, for all of us, for Eric Melikian, for Adam Woods, according to Woods, and our guest, the one and only, this guy right here, the Navajo Warrior, the legend, the icon, Navajo. Once again, thank you for joining us. For Eric, for Adam, for Navajo, my name is Kris Kloss. This has been the Wrestling with Reality podcast, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. And don't forget to follow us on the socials, Wrestling with Reality podcast on the socials. We'll see you later.